one of the things, as I said, that I think we need to do is think about what's happening in society. Okay, that's a very big question. So over the last 10 years, what we've been doing in our research is looking at translation and translanguaging in schools and in domestic settings of young people and teachers in the classrooms, but also outside of the classrooms in homes and families. And what I want to suggest is that we need to, as sociolinguists and as an educationalist, to extend our horizons and look beyond the classrooms to think about more what is happening in our public, private, and online digital worlds, and how we communicate in these contexts, in rapidly changing, super diverse urban contexts. So the world is changing, and for that reason, we need to look at language in use in these, as I say, rapidly changing urban contexts. And we need to ask questions to better understand how our cultures, identities, and forms of expression are changing. And then as teachers, we need to think about what that means for us as teachers and what kind of pedagogies and forms of assessment we might need to respond to this diversity. So here I offer three definitions that are increasingly important to us in our work. So we're defining translation as the negotiation of meaning using different modes, spoken, written, visual, gestural, where speakers deploy different proficiencies in a range of languages. So translation has typically been about moving from, say, the known to the unknown, from one form to another form, and the focus has been on languages. Translanguaging are discursive practices that constitute speakers' language repertoires and make visible their different histories, identities, and heritages. So the emphasis here is on repertoires, what people, the bits and pieces, the full range that people draw on without those kind of clear language boundaries in order to make meaning. And we are thinking about translation and translanguaging in translation zones. So areas, and we define these as areas of negotiation. Spaces where connections are created, where translanguaging and translation are features of communication. So let's come back to communicative competence and think about that in the kind of context I've tried to paint for you here. Communicative competence in superdiversity. Claire Cranch says globalization is reshuffling the cards. She actually says multilingualism is the golden coin of the realm. She says, you know, monolingualism is had it. And she says, a few decades ago, the boundaries of speech communities were more clearly delineated and everyone knew their place. Legitimacy and authenticity was simple. I don't know if that's ever the case, but I think what the point she's making here is that we operated with the idea that the speech community was represented by a native speaker, and you know that was often tied to a nation state, so a language represented a nation or a community. A learner's communicative competence was measured against clear benchmarks of grammatical, pragmatic, sociolinguistic, and discourse competence. Those are the kind of Canalian Swain competences, again, that they've worked very closely following on from Himes, those kind of benchmarks. And discourse competence, and a learner to this day evaluated for its ability to fit into the categories of accuracy, fluency, and cultural content as spoken by the monolingual speaker of a standard national L2, kind of native speaker representative idea. So she says all of that is changing. Okay, so I want to just make this, just go back and perhaps make this a bit personal, because I think there's nothing that kind of ages you actually, like old language materials. And back in the 80s, I used to work in Philadelphia, in the University of Pennsylvania, where I was doing my PhD, but I was also teaching EFL. And we used a book called Speaking Naturally, and on the back of the book it says Communication Skills in American English. The student's book focuses on a language function such as requesting information, thanking, complimenting and inviting, while readings explain the cultural rules students need to know to communicate naturally and effectively. Okay, these ideas of rules that you could tell your students, this is how you should speak. And, you know, this was a very powerful resource. I always found it difficult when students used to say, well, can I say this? And, of course, the answer is always, it depends on the context, it depends on the speakers, it depends on so many things. And here's another extract that tells you what you should do if you receive a compliment. When you receive a compliment, whether on your work, your clothing, your family, or anything else, it's appropriate to say thank you and make a compliment about the thing being complimented. So, okay, it seems nice and clear. So if I say, oh, I love your top, you can say, oh, thanks very much, I got it in the sales, or something like that. Okay. But of course, and in fact, there's quite a lot of work that's done, quite interesting work that's done on how gender works into this. You know, women particularly of a similar social status and age group often do this to kind of bond and make friends and things. So there's quite a lot of stuff done on compliments. But you know, it's such a kind of blanket statement. You know, whether this is okay for, I don't know, Pete and Constant to say, oh, I love your shirt, or whether for me to say to Paul, well, I love those glasses, they just, you know, they're just really great for you. Or whether it's, you know, there's all kinds of social rules in play, right? And it very much depends on the participant, the interactant and the context. But these are the kinds of materials that we were using. And this was under the remit of communicative language teaching, perhaps a bit of kind of functional, you know, approaches to language teaching, but it's certainly, we certainly thought we were doing communicative language teaching. And so communicative competence has, you know, really played its part in shaping pedagogy, communicative language teaching, and as I say, across the different areas of language teaching, whether you're in ESOL or whether you're in MFL or EFL or EAL. I mean, the idea of using language to communicate, very important. And it's had a huge influence, communicative language teaching. So since its inception in the 1970s, CLT has served as a major source of influence on language teaching practices around the world. And CLT is the engagement of learners in communication in order to allow them to develop their communicative competence. And that takes us back to what we mean by communicative competence now. I think okay, yeah. And when we think about communicative competence, when we think about CLT, and the books like Speaking Naturally that I just showed you, there has been this assumption, as Claire Crouch also argues, that the best way to teach a language is to keep all other languages outside the classroom. Actually, that's much less true in EAL and ESOL, but certainly more in EFL contexts. The argument has been that the best way to learn a language is to use that target language only and keep the other languages outside. And there's a list, that's a collection from across scholars that have written about this. So instruction should be carried out exclusively in the target language without recourse to students L1. A lot of kind of guilt associated with say, the bilingual teacher if they use the first language. You know, there's a kind of feeling that they somehow, you know, haven't succeeded if they've had to use the first language. Monolingual approach is the best way to teach a language. Translation between L1 and L2 has no place in the teaching of language or literacy. Within language programs, the two languages should be kept rigidly separate on the timetable. So even in bilingual programs, you know, you'd have one language in the morning and one language in the afternoon. The ideal language teacher is a native speaker. The earlier a language is taught, the better. The the more the target language is used in the classroom, the better the results. Okay, so there's been a rationale for this, and of course again it depends on context and access to different resources within and outside of the classroom. Okay, so many of us, and David Block has written about this, talks about teachers, he himself, and many of us as teachers, as converts, zealous proponents of all things CLT. So I've more or less covered the intro there, the social and theoretical context, and now I'd like to move to some data and more description of the work that we've been doing, the research that we've been doing.